that and I'll share the link to where to find that recording so that you can follow up on any information that you may miss from our live presentation. Okay, so we have 2 presenters today. We have Ramesh Advani and Susan Shiro with SCORE Boston. Ramesh will be doing the bulk of the presentation, but we have 2 experts that can answer any and all your questions that you may have along the way today. I just want to give you a little bit of background on SCORE itself. SCORE does a couple of tasks, one being training through webinars and some workshops. And they also have excellent websites with all kinds of recorded videos and templates and little presentations that you can watch to gather information. But the most important thing that SCORE does is the mentoring. Our mentors are volunteers. They come from all different backgrounds, and they have experiences and knowledge that they're looking to share with folks that are in the process of starting a business, who are thinking about starting a business, and who are in business. And this includes the profit and the nonprofit world. So I strongly encourage you to reach out to us to get a mentor. You do not have to have already registered. You do not have to already have a business plan. We're there from the beginning just to work with you. A lot of people ask, what is a mentoring session like? Mentoring sessions will run 30, 45, sometimes 60 minutes. Especially that first session will be about sharing your goals, talking about where you're at in the moment, and the mentor will help you put together a plan. They will help you find resources, etc. This is how you get a mentor. You can go to one of these websites. I will put those links into the chat after my intro. You can also just put a note in chat and say, I'd love a mentor, and I will make sure that the right chapter reaches out to you to get you scheduled with someone. Today, we do have a handful of people that are going to be with us, so we want to make sure we don't miss any of your questions. Please put any questions that you would like asked to our presenters today in the Q&A tab. That allows me to not lose track of anything, as the chat can often scroll and have a lot of additional information in it. So questions for the presenter, Q&A tab, and we will pause throughout to take your questions. So get them in there. Chat can be used for any other comments or general questions that you may have along the way. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop my share, and I'm going to turn it over to Ramesh, and he'll give us a little bit of background and then get started.
Great. Thank you very much, Teresa. I'm delighted all of you are here. I've been counseling at SCORE for many years, both for nonprofits and for-profits, businesses for entrepreneurs. And I am currently involved on the boards of a few nonprofits. I used to be the CFO of a nonprofit here in the Boston area. So I am generally familiar with all aspects of a nonprofit as well as a for-profit. I will just pause for a second and let Susan introduce herself, and then I will get into the slides.
Hi, like Ramesh, I've been with SCORE for a couple of years, and my nonprofit background is primarily from a small nonprofit that I started and ran for close to 20 years. I'm on the board of one, so I have some experience. I guess I've been on other boards too, with being on the volunteer side. And thank you, Ramesh, for inviting me to join you.
Thanks, Susan. All right, we'll jump right in. Hope you will be able to see my slides. Our plan here is we're going to start off, and some of this may sound rudimentary, but I think it's very important that everybody understands the language and the implied legal and public aspects behind the words that we use. So I will start off by talking about what is a nonprofit and how is it different and how is it the same as a for-profit. And then I'll pause and see if there are any questions, and Susan and I will help answer them. Then we'll talk about what are the musts for a nonprofit, and I'll pause after that. And then we'll talk about roles and money, because when you're doing anything with a nonprofit, fundraising and money is very significant. And then we'll talk a little bit about collaboration and competition, because those of you who are participating in this webinar from Massachusetts, you know that we have well over 8,000 nonprofits just in Massachusetts alone. For the size of the state we are, we do have lots and lots of nonprofits. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and we'll talk about your strengths and gaps, and then some next steps. So that's the agenda for today, and let me just launch right into it. So what is a nonprofit? A nonprofit, the acronym NPO, you'll probably see that referred to in many places, is basically a non-business entity. And as the words say, it's a not-for-profit organization or a not-for-profit nonprofit institution. It's a legal entity which is organized and operated for some public or social benefit, to benefit a big part of the community. One of the key features of a nonprofit from a legal standpoint, as well as from a tax standpoint, it is subject to what's called a non-distribution constraint. What does that phrase mean, non-distribution constraint? Well, basically, all the expenses that a nonprofit incurs come from the revenues that the nonprofit has, and any extra revenue over the expenses, those excess revenues must be committed to the organization's purpose and cannot be taken by any private parties. So even if you as a founder, you as an individual are a private party, you cannot directly take any excess revenues over expenses. Well, you know what excess revenues over expenses, the simpler word for that is profit. So this being a nonprofit, whatever excess revenues are there cannot be redistributed to other people. So that's a very simple, straightforward definition of nonprofit. I may be stating the obvious, but it's important as you're thinking about forming a nonprofit, you keep this in mind. So the question arises then, what are the differences between a for-profit and a nonprofit, right? I'll just talk about the four. Again, some of this may be obvious. There are four major differences. A for-profit entity is one that operates with the idea that it'll generate profit for the owners. Yes, the market and customers will get a benefit from the products and services of a for-profit, but the primary purpose is to generate a profit for its owners. The second difference from a nonprofit is a for-profit entity pays taxes on the profits it makes, and then it distributes the remainder of the profit to its owners, and it can reinvest it in the company. So when there is profit, it can be distributed as dividends. I'm sure you've heard that term, or it says, maybe we will not redistribute any dividends. We will take the excess and invest it back in expanding the company. A nonprofit pays no taxes. So the first step is the government takes out taxes from the profits, and then the rest of the money is shared. Whereas for a nonprofit, there are no taxes, which is why in the previous slide, as I explained, all the money that is excess over expenses gets reinvested in the nonprofit. The third point, it may sound obvious, but it's important to know, especially for founders of nonprofits, no one owns a nonprofit. It's like a public entity. No, there is no owner. Whereas, in a for-profit, there are owners, the people who have the shares or own the whole nonprofit, the whole profit, for-profit. A nonprofit is not owned by anybody. And then the last point is, a nonprofit can raise public funds, and in the use of those funds, they have to be accountable, and a nonprofit must be transparent. Now, certainly a for-profit can also raise public funds through the stock market, but the rules that a for-profit follows, how transparent they are in the use of the funds and all, it's not quite the same thing. Whereas for a nonprofit, it's very clear, it's spelled out in the law and in our tax code, what happens to the public funds that are raised by a nonprofit. So those are the differences between a for-profit and a not-for-profit. What's common between the two, the first one, it must accomplish its mission. A nonprofit and a for-profit company must accomplish the mission and must make enough money so that they stay in business. You can't just cover your expenses and then basically, essentially, you are a break even or you're going to go out of business. So that requirement is there on both types of organization. A nonprofit, many people think of a nonprofit as, oh, I'm here to serve the community, service people, and there's no competition. Competition, well, that's a dirty word that only belongs in the general marketplace to the for-profit company. Not true. Many nonprofits may serve the same population or similar population, providing even the same service. And so there is competition. And this competition manifests itself in who uses your nonprofit, as well as how can you get funding raised for your nonprofit. So this is what's the same and what's different between a for-profit and a not-for-profit. I'll just pause here briefly to see if there are any questions anyone has.
I do not see any questions posted quite yet.
Okay, thanks, Teresa. So I'll just go on. So what are the musts for a nonprofit organization? The first one is you have to be very transparent and make sure that all state and federal requirements of reporting and filing are met on time. The second is when you form the nonprofit, you have to have a set of organization bylaws that are documented, that are written down, and something that are called the articles of organization that have also got to be written down and then also filed with the Secretary of State. The third is you have to make sure that any salaries that are paid out to officers and any highly compensated employees are reported publicly. Now, how do they get reported publicly? The federal return that you file is publicly available to the general population. And in that filing, the salaries are listed by name and what the person was paid for that particular fiscal year. And the last must is you have to have a board of directors. Like I said, no one owns a nonprofit, but there is a board of directors. And the board of directors are the ones who are responsible and accountable for governance and oversight. And anyone who's on the board of directors, they have to have no financial incentives. And of course, they have to be competent. Any questions on these musts?
No questions yet.
Okay, great. I hope I'm being very clear on what I'm saying, or
Ramesh, maybe you should explain the word transparent.
please go ahead.
But transparent it's what Ramesh was talking about putting, for example, the salaries out on in the tax form. There is a tax form, even though you're not paying corporate tax to the government. And that's the form that also lists salaries. A lot of things are out there in the public domain. If you're curious about how much of the restaurant down the street sells, you can't find that out unless you talk to them and they want to tell you. As a nonprofit, the income will be out there. Everybody will know it. And the expenses will be out there. Everybody can see it. And that's what Ramesh means by being transparent.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Absolutely correct. All right, so we went over what was a for-profit, not-for-profit, what was different, what was the same, and what are some of the musts for a nonprofit. So what are the key roles when you form a nonprofit? Remember I said it's important to have a board of directors. When you define the articles of organization of a nonprofit, in that articles of organization and in the bylaws, you would define how many board positions there will be. And you can have as many as you like. However, at a minimum, you have to have 3 specific board positions defined, and those, they have to be, you have to have people in those roles. The first one is the chair of the board of directors. The second is the treasurer. And the third is the secretary or the clerk of the board, a clerk of the nonprofit. The secretary is responsible for keeping all of the minutes of the board meetings, etc., and making sure they are approved by the board in subsequent meetings. And the treasurer stays on top of all the numbers, and the financial responsibility lies with the treasurer, and the overall responsibility is with the chair. Then below the board of directors, there's essentially an executive management. Now, this is where the compensated part of the main players in a nonprofit comes in. The most significant one is, which in the for-profit, what you call the CEO, is the executive director. The executive director is compensated, and the compensation of the executive director is one that has to be approved by the board of directors. And then there are key staff members, and the staff members essentially get into different parts of operations: finance, fundraising, marketing, and running the nonprofit. And in that area of operations, I'm making a particular mention of IT, because these days there's very little you can do without having a proper technology base of running your organization. Now, usually a question comes up when someone is a founder of a new nonprofit. Can I get compensated? Well, if you are the founder and you also therefore make yourself a board member, you could make yourself the chair of the board, or you could be just a board member. You could also be the executive director. In your role as the executive director, you can be compensated for that role, for the management role. And you have to make sure, the board has to make sure, not just you, but the board, that there are proper financial safeguards in the articles of organization. I'll stop here. Any questions on these roles?
We don't have any questions posted at this time.
Okay, thank you. All right. So switching topics about a nonprofit structure and the bylaws, etc. Money. What matters more than anything else is always money. And I can tell you this from my knowledge and experience of nonprofits, even if a nonprofit has been in existence for many, many years, it never can generate enough earned revenue from its services to cover all its expenses. So what does a nonprofit have to do? Because it needs to generate revenues to cover all of its costs to meet its mission and stay in business, which means they can also expand and grow, and the revenues do not cover all the costs, a nonprofit has to do fundraising from donors and get grants, and that's an essential part of a nonprofit's existence. So one of the sources of making sure you have a good network of people you can tap into for fundraising is through your board of directors. And so you should make sure that the board of directors has people who either have deep pockets or know of people with deep pockets, or know of people who are familiar with foundations who will give out grants. And you can also get grants, not just from private funders, but also from public funders, from the state, from the county, from the federal government. So it's important to realize that money sources doesn't just come from the services that the nonprofit provides, it also comes from the donors. Now, once a donor, a foundation or an individual donor has bought into the mission and is very pleased with the results of the work being done by the nonprofit, they will make repeat donations. And those are the ones that are really important, multi-year donations and repeat donations. And in order to make sure that you get that going, you've got to make sure that you are very transparent and communicate the outcomes from the work that the nonprofit is doing with the donors, and also make sure this communication is timely so that they can see it and they can react to it, and you can be assured that they will keep funding you. Any questions on this?
We do have some questions. What sort of financial safeguards would assure a combination board chair, executive director lacks financial incentives?
Susan, you want to?
I'm sorry, will you repeat that, please?
Yeah. What sort of financial safeguards would assure a combination board chair / executive director lacks financial incentives?
Well, first of all, the board members and board chairs are never compensated for nonprofits. Their expenses can be covered if, for example, if you make your nonprofit and it becomes huge, and now you've got a board member in California, that you can pay that board's cost to come from California to Massachusetts for a meeting. But they didn't. But the money should be all spent, whatever you give them, and it's just for the necessity. In terms of financial safeguards, my rule of thumb was always you want 2 sets of fingerprints on any financial transaction. That means I didn't want the office manager to get the mail, open it up, take the check out, endorse it for deposit and send it off to the bank. I wanted, in that case, if we were small, I wanted also to see it. And I mean, someday something's going to go wrong. Things do. So that's the biggest one is the two people touching it. We also had a rule on the subject of if it's a big check, picked a number. In our case, it was 25,000. I needed any check over 25,000 had to be signed by two people. And Ramesh, this is, what have I missed that you would add to that?
No, Susan, you're right on, but I'm not sure the person who's asking the question may have been thinking about that footnote that I had where a founder can be the executive director as well as be on the board. And if that's the case, I think what's going to be important that the two people who would stay on top of, in addition to the safeguards that Susan talked about, one is whoever does your accounting or your CFO will have to make sure that all of the payments are, particularly if it's payroll related, that let's say you're as an executive director are getting a certain pay, which has been approved by the board. And say you're also the chair of the board, but that doesn't matter because the payroll will be processed in a formal basis. And on top of that, when you file your annual federal return, you know, many times those, if you're above a certain level, they have to be audited, and the auditors will be another set of eyes. But I think the safest practical way of making sure that there is no fraud is to have, you should have, and I used to always have that as the CFO, I would always have, you know, how many signatures are needed, up to what point, and, you know, even to approve anything and to sign anything. So that's how you make sure you have at least two sets of eyes. So Susan is absolutely right. Does that answer your question, the person who asked that?
Yeah, if there's any more information we can provide to that question. Yeah, he says yes.
Yes, good.
Okay. Okay, so there isn't, oh, go ahead.
Okay, there's one in the chat also about membership organization. I'm sorry, Teresa, was that where you were going?
I was, go ahead. Yep.
And I'm sure everyone can see that question. And we did leave that out as a source of donations. Yes, nonprofits can have members. Members can be individuals. They can be organizations, and they can. You can charge whatever they're willing to pay to enable them to be members. Ramesh, your thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. So, for example, I am on the board of a nonprofit in Boston that is a maker place that consists of, in order to be part of that nonprofit, you have to either have it is an artisans organization that has studios, and in order to rent a studio, you have to be a member. And so they have memberships, and the source of the earned revenue, if you will, stream of that nonprofit is from those members. And those members could be individuals. They could also be other organizations. Other nonprofits can be members of that nonprofit.
And then the other question in the chat is whether donors have to be on the board. And
no, absolutely not.
They don't.
It would be nice. One important thing when you apply for a grant or a fund, one of the questions that the foundations and grantors will always ask, how many board members are making donations to the nonprofit? And generally, the answer they're looking for, the ideal answer, that every board member is making a donation. So it's very important to show that every board member is committed to the mission of the nonprofit and is making donations. So, but you don't have to be on the board in order to make a donation. There's
Yeah,
a
there's a-
question from
yeah.
Ariel. I'm just sorry, I just realized
Yes.
I can look at the chat too. Do you see any red flags to arise by starting a nonprofit based on a for-profit? For example, for-profit decide they have a mission on the side with social benefit. Actually, this is a very good question, Ariel. And many large organizations that are for-profit, and you all know the big names, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, they're so successful and have made so much money that they start a foundation with the purpose, which is a nonprofit, and they provide the funding to the foundation that they formed, to the nonprofit. Of course, that nonprofit, let's say Microsoft, like Bill Gates formed a nonprofit, or the Clinton Healthcare Foundation, you cannot intermingle the financials or activities of the for-profit with the nonprofit. You can certainly have board members, influential board members for the nonprofit, but there is nothing wrong with a for-profit setting up a nonprofit, but it's two separate legal entities. I don't know if that's making sense. Susan, would you like to add anything to that?
I think, unless it's unclear, and it was Ariel's question, I think you did a great job. Makes sense. Okay, good.
Oh, okay.
And Mark then asked if it's important to make outcomes visible to donors. He thinks that ensuring frequent incremental outcomes rather than rare, huge ones is advisable. Yes, I would agree. You want to be able to declare success frequently. That said, when the huge one arises, or when you finally hit that ultimate goal, by all means, you would declare success loud and long.
Yeah.
Ramesh?
Yes, I agree. And Leslie asked, can donations in regard to the board of directors be from their own fundraising? Absolutely, but it's important that they, even if they do the fundraising, that they make it very clear to the donors, to the end of the line donors, where these funds are going, so that it can be identified that it's directly going to that nonprofit.
And the form in which I would receive the question about whether my donors were my board members contributed, the question is, and yes, you obviously are familiar with the get or give model, but the question that would be asked is, what percentage of the board makes contributions from their own personal resources? So it can be a very, it can be a very small contribution. If you've got somebody with deep experience and great strategic who's taken a vow of poverty, please, they've still got to make a contribution just to keep all those donors happy. You don't have to tell the donor how large or how small the contributions were.
Great. If there are no other questions, I'll go to the next slide.
Yeah, I think we're caught up.
Okay, great. So the next slide, this also may be self-evident, but competition and collaboration. When you form a nonprofit or you're thinking of doing one, just be aware of who else is in that space. And when I say who else, I mean who else in the geographic area or the range. So for example, if you're doing something, forming a nonprofit in Massachusetts, just be aware of what's going on in New England overall, because there could be people who might have the exact same mission and the exact same services that they're giving the community, but they are in Rhode Island or they're in New Hampshire. So, and if somebody has been in operation for a long time, you should learn from them and see what you can do better. And again, this is a nonprofit we're talking about, looking at other nonprofits. So you should consider who is willing to collaborate, and that way they are expanding and spreading their wings, and you are also going to be offering additional resources. So there's a lot more, even though it's competition, you can certainly do a lot more collaboration and cooperate and find out what are the synergies so people can benefit the clients. This is particularly true when there are nonprofits who are targeting certain communities, disadvantaged communities or certain parts of the city or minorities. I think it's much better for the clients, for the beneficiaries of these services, to have nonprofits working together. So that's at a very high level. What are the things you need to be thinking about to start a nonprofit? I'm kind of switching gears here. As you are thinking about this, and I say this to anybody who comes to us for mentoring, whether it's a for-profit or a not-for-profit, the first, you have to examine your own strengths and weaknesses or gaps. The first one is, will your circumstances, whatever they are in life, allow you to spend the time and energy to stick with this mission of this organization you're forming until it's an established nonprofit in the area? So you have to really do some soul searching. Do you have the ability to do that? The next thing is, what are you good at? What are the, I would say, tasks or the aspects of the business that you can do well? So once you know what you're good at, the next point over there is, what are you not good at? So whatever you're not good at, pay a lot of attention to that, because you have to recruit resources and skills to make up for that, because you're going to work as a team. And if there are people who are interested in the same cause, and they would be interested in your nonprofit, what you're doing, and are willing to get actively involved, you should find out, make a list of those people and get them engaged. The next point is relative to funding. I think this is sort of goes without saying. How are you going to go about finding the people and the resources to meet your mission, and also to help you do things that you're not good at, that they can do it? And once you've got this board of directors and your executive team together, are you capable of motivating and leading a team? Do you know what it takes to be a coach? How to push people without making them feel they're being pushed, making sure that people have the goals. And once you have your team going, you kind of switch to another way of thinking. Is, you may be doing everything at the start yourself, but once you've got other people who've been trained, are you willing to trust those under you and willing to consider they might make mistakes? It's okay, but are you ready to delegate? Are you the kind of person who doesn't try to do everything, by himself or herself, but you're willing to delegate? So those are, this is almost like doing a little inventory of your pluses and minuses relative to the organization that you want to set up as an entrepreneur. So that's pretty much the presentation that I have. The last slide, I would suggest and give you some homework. Gather your thoughts, write out your responses to what you've learned, and then what I would suggest, this is our number, or you can see boston.score.org, and Teresa will be happy to set up time for you to come and talk with one of the members. So we have different practice groups in the Boston chapter. So I am, and Susan is a part of the nonprofit practice group. You can just ask to have a meeting with us and with the one particular individual, and Teresa will set that up for you, and then we can take it from there and talk about specifics related to the nonprofit that you want to form.
Okay, we do have a question.
Yes.
Can a nonprofit start at a for-profit organization whose profits supporting the nonprofit mission?
The short answer to that is no. That's kind of sort of turning the whole legal definition of a nonprofit on its head. So if there is an organization that is a nonprofit, well, they can continue to sell things, for example, and all the proceeds from the sales would be part of the earned revenue stream of that nonprofit. Everything would be just commingled with all of the revenue stream that the nonprofit has.
But it gets reported in that you can have related business income and unrelated business income. So for example, if it's a job training organization and they're training people to do cooking jobs, they can have a kitchen and sell food, and that's related business income. If they then decide to sell t-shirts and mugs, that's unrelated business income and gets accounted for differently. So there's a way that there can be profit-making opportunities that the nonprofit takes care of. Ramesh will tell you what the percentages are, at which point you get into trouble if there's too much unrelated business income.
Yeah.
I never had the problem.
Right, but the thing is, Susan is right. However, if you're just starting out, try to keep your, keep it simple and keep your life straightforward. Form the nonprofit. There's a lot of work involved with forming a nonprofit and running it. So you should focus on that part. Well,
I'm not seeing any other questions. Oh, wait, let's see. Hold on. What if the nonprofit develops intellectual property that can be monetized in the future?
That's a very good question. And that's fine. I think when it's monetized, all of the revenues or the income from that IP in the future will go to the nonprofit.
And by all means, please get yourself a good patent attorney if there's something that valuable.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely. Okay. All right, I think we've had all the questions now. Let me just double check real quick that I didn't miss anything in the chat. Will you contrast nonprofit with a social enterprise?
Could the person define what they mean by a social enterprise? Like the Boston Food Bank, for example, is a nonprofit, but it's also a social enterprise. I'm not sure I understand.
Or are you talking about a B corporation?
That's what I was wondering, if they were talking about a B corporation. Let's see if we can get a response on that. Yes, B Corp. He said, can you tell the difference, explain the difference between a nonprofit and a B Corp?
Ramesh, do you want to handle that? I'm no
Sorry.
expert. I'm no expert. I can tell you how I think of it.
I don't know. Honestly, I wouldn't know what a good answer would be to that question. I've never dealt with it. So, but what I can do is I can, if the person who asked the question, because I've lost my screen here, can just send an email and I will get the answer to that.
Yeah, actually, I know who knows that information.
Okay, great. Thanks,
Yeah.
Teresa.
Yeah, I'll send an email to Mark. How would a founder choose? Okay, yeah, yeah, and he's asking how would I choose between the two? So I'd be happy to help you connect with a mentor that knows a little bit more about B Corps.
And
see.
the short answer, if I may,
Yeah,
is apt to be where the money's going to come from. A B Corp is a for-profit that acts more like a nonprofit, but that doesn't mean that it'll get charitable grant money from foundations. If it's a great mission and you think that the big foundations are going to want to help you with it, they will not contribute money if the B Corp is, as I believe, a for-profit.
okay. I do have another question about, I don't know if this is something you guys know. Where is Massachusetts at this point with L3Cs?
With what?
L3Cs?
I don't know what is that. Can someone tell me what that is?
I don't know.
I don't know either. Never heard of it.
Okay. I'll write this down and we can maybe
See what we can learn.
follow up on that.
L3C.
When writing a first year budget, so should taxes of any kind be included?
Sorry, say that again?
When writing a first year budget, I assume they're working on their, their plan and their budgeting. Should taxes of any kind be included?
Absolutely. All employee taxes. You will pay Social Security, Medicare. As that does not differ. So relative to the people you plan to employ, yes.
Yeah, and if you actually own some property, then there's real estate taxes. That
shouldn't be.
There shouldn't be, but there could be. But the main thing is there are no taxes on the excess revenue over your expenses. Those are the things that you don't have to pay any taxes on.
But no taxes on any sales that the nonprofit has?
As long as it's related to the mission, I would think there wouldn't be.
Correct. There's no sales and use tax on any stream of revenues that come in related to the mission of the organization. But
if they're selling t-shirts on the side?
Well, that's the on the side part of it, which I would A, not recommend it, B, make sure that your accountant can explain how that source of revenue and the costs associated that will be accounted for. But yes, if that's taxable revenue, then you would have to account for that. But I would discourage you from selling t-shirts on the side. You're distracting yourself from the mission.
Okay, she's also adding, she's thinking more along the lines of taxes from office supplies.
You don't pay taxes. If you're a 501c3, there's a process, and we have materials that lay out how you get permission not to pay taxes on your office supplies.
Yeah, you get exemption for all of that. You have, depending on this, every state has their own way of dealing with that, but Massachusetts, you just basically have a tax exemption thing on file, and any vendor who you buy things from, you just give it to them and they will not charge you the tax on that.
Okay. I do have a question in chat. How much is the startup cost estimate? I guess the question probably is more like, how do I figure out what my startup cost estimate is?
That's such a broad general question. I would, I hate to answer a question with a question. What is involved in the startup? Talking about people costs, marketing costs, information technology costs.
Or just the cost to become a 501c3, which is $275 or $650, I think, depending on the kind of permission you go for. It may be, the legal fees probably hit about $800 just to start, if you want to start one that's intended to raise more than $250,000 in the first year.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep, we got to thank you, Susan, on that one. So that was, you hit it right on the nose. Okay. All right. I do not see any more questions. So I definitely would like to strongly encourage you to reach out to SCORE in general, or SCORE Boston if you're in the Boston area, or we can get you connected to your chapter if you like, for a mentor to assist you with any nonprofit questions that you come up with after we finish here today. And I want to thank Ramesh and Susan for sharing your experience and knowledge with us today, and for all of you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Teresa and Ramesh.
Thanks.
And
Lisa.
thank you to those of you who attended.